Everyone knows Harley-Davidson defined American motorcycling. Everyone remembers the British bikes that once ruled the world. And everyone assumes that some legendary sport bike or cruiser must hold the title as the best-selling motorcycle ever made. But what if I told you that the best-selling motorcycle in history, the best-selling motor vehicle of any kind ever produced, wasn't a muscle bike, wasn't a chopper, and wasn't even designed to be cool? What if I told you it was a small, practical, step-through motorcycle that your grandmother could ride, that delivered newspapers in Tokyo, hauled noodles in Bangkok, and changed the entire image of motorcycling in America? We're talking about over 100 million units sold since 1958. We're talking about a machine manufactured in 15 countries and sold in over 160 nations. We're talking about the Honda Super Cub, the motorcycle that proved Soichiro Honda's vision that two wheels could belong to everyone, not just rebels and racers. Here's the kicker. This humble little motorcycle didn't just outsell every other bike ever made. It outsold every car, every truck, every vehicle in automotive history. And that's where the story begins. To understand how the Super Cub became the best-selling vehicle in history, you need to understand post-war Japan and the man who refused to accept that motorcycles had to be loud, dirty, dangerous machines for outlaws and speed demons. Soichiro Honda started his company in 1946, just after World War II had devastated Japan and left the nation desperate for affordable transportation. The cities were rebuilding, the economy was recovering, and millions of people needed ways to get to work, to markets, to anywhere that could help them survive and rebuild their lives. Honda's first products were simple, motorized bicycles using surplus military engines. But Soichiro Honda wasn't satisfied with crude, temporary solutions. He wanted to build real motorcycles, machines engineered properly rather than cobbled together from whatever parts were available. By the early 1950s, Honda Motor Company was producing small motorcycles, but the Japanese market was crowded with competitors, many of them building similar bikes, targeting the same customers who needed cheap, basic transportation. Soichiro Honda saw an opportunity that others missed. Everyone was building motorcycles for men, machines that required skill to operate, that got your clothes dirty, that were loud and intimidating. But what if you could build a motorcycle that anyone could ride? What if you could create something so simple, so clean, so reliable that it would appeal to people who would never consider themselves motorcyclists? What if you could make two wheels as accessible as bicycles but faster and more capable? In 1958, Honda introduced the Super Cub C100, and it was genuinely revolutionary in ways that seem obvious now, but were radical then. The engine displaced just 49 cubic inches, a tiny overhead valve four-stroke single cylinder that produced less than 5 horsepower. But that modest engine was brilliantly engineered with overhead valves, proper lubrication, and construction that would last decades rather than months, like the crude two-strokes that many competitors were building. The transmission was the Super Cub's secret weapon. Honda fitted a 3-speed semi-automatic gearbox with centrifugal clutch that eliminated the hand-clutch lever that intimidated novice riders. You shifted with your left foot just like conventional motorcycles, but the clutch engaged and disengaged automatically based on engine speed, meaning you never had to worry about stalling or coordinating clutch and throttle like traditional bikes required. It was brilliantly simple. Easy enough for anyone to learn within minutes, but sophisticated enough to provide real performance and efficiency. The centrifugal mechanism used weighted shoes that flung outward as engine speed increased, automatically engaging the clutch progressively and smoothly, without the jerky engagement that manual clutches could create when operated by inexperienced riders who hadn't yet developed the feel for friction zones and engagement points. The gear ratios were carefully selected to provide strong acceleration from stops in first gear, comfortable cruising in second gear for urban riding, and overdrive third gear for highway speeds, where the little engine could maintain 30 to 40 miles per hour without straining or consuming excessive fuel. The shifting action required only light pressure on the foot lever, with distinct positive engagement that provided clear feedback when gears meshed, eliminating the vague, uncertain feeling that some transmissions created and leaving riders confident they'd completed the shift successfully. The neutral position was located between first and second gears following motorcycle convention, but the positive detents made finding neutral easy, even for riders who'd never operated motorcycles before and were still learning the mechanical sympathy that experienced riders developed naturally. The durability of the transmission was exceptional, with the simple design featuring fewer moving parts than conventional motorcycle gearboxes, reducing wear points and failure modes while creating a transmission that could last hundreds of thousands of miles with nothing more than periodic oil changes. using the same oil that lubricated the engine. The clutch required no adjustment throughout its service life, with the centrifugal mechanism automatically compensating for wear as the friction material gradually thinned, maintaining consistent engagement characteristics from new until the clutch eventually needed replacement after tens of thousands of miles of daily use. The ease of operation meant riders could focus entirely on steering, braking, and observing traffic rather than dividing attention between multiple controls, making the Super Cub genuinely safer for novice riders who would have been overwhelmed by conventional motorcycles, requiring simultaneous coordination of throttle, clutch, brake, and shifter. The transmission allowed smooth starts on hills without the rollback that manual clutches created when riders released brakes before fully engaging clutches, eliminating one of the most stressful situations that new riders faced when learning motorcycle operation in real traffic conditions. The downshifting was equally simple, with riders able to click down through gears while approaching stops without worrying about matching engine speed or blipping throttle, trusting that the automatic clutch would prevent engine lugging or rear wheel lockup that manual transmissions could create during aggressive downshifts. The mechanical simplicity meant repairs were straightforward and inexpensive when eventually needed, with replacement parts readily available and installation procedures simple enough that competent home mechanics could service transmissions using basic hand tools without requiring specialized equipment or factory training. The semi-automatic transmission became one of Honda's most copied innovations, with competitors rushing to develop similar systems. Once the Super Cub's success proved that eliminating the hand clutch lever dramatically expanded the potential customer base beyond experienced motorcyclists to include anyone who could ride a bicycle and operate a simple foot shifter. The transmission allowed one-handed riding when necessary for signaling turns or carrying small items, providing flexibility that conventional motorcycles couldn't offer because both hands were always required for throttle and clutch operation during any gear changes. The cold weather operation was superior to manual clutches, with the automatic engagement eliminating the stiff, difficult clutch lever operation that plagued conventional motorcycles in freezing temperatures when cable friction increased and lever effort became exhausting during stop-and-go traffic. The transmission's progressive engagement also reduced wear on the drive chain and rear sprocket by avoiding the shock loads that manual clutches could create when inexperienced riders released clutch levers too quickly, creating sudden torque spikes that accelerated component wear and sometimes caused chain or sprocket failure. The engineering elegance of the semi-automatic transmission exemplified Honda's philosophy that the best solutions were often the simplest, proving that removing complexity rather than adding features could create superior products that serve customers better while costing less to manufacture and maintain throughout decades of reliable service. Ever owned a Super Cub? Remember when Honda changed everything? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe now. More legendary motorcycles. An untold history coming soon. The frame was stepped-through design with the engine positioned low and forward, creating a layout where riders could sit upright with both feet flat on the ground, mounting and dismounting without swinging legs over high seats or tanks. The design was practical for riders wearing business clothes, dresses, or traditional garments that wouldn't work with conventional motorcycle layouts, requiring riders to straddle high frames. The Super Cub could be ridden in street clothes, without getting dirty, without tearing fabric, without any of the mess and inconvenience that motorcycles traditionally created. The styling was clean and modern, with pressed steel leg shields protecting riders from road spray and engine heat, a long, comfortable seat that could carry a passenger, and bodywork that looked more like a motor scooter than a traditional motorcycle. The Super Cub wasn't trying to look tough or fast. It was trying to look friendly, approachable, and practical. A tool for transportation rather than a statement of rebellion or speed. The engineering was obsessive with Honda, specifying quality levels that seemed excessive for such an inexpensive machine. The electrical system was 12 volts with proper generator and battery, providing reliable starting and bright lights. The suspension was basic but adequate, with telescopic front fork and swing arm rear, providing reasonable comfort on rough roads. The brakes were drums, front and rear, adequate for the Super Cub's modest speeds and light weight that hovered around 120 pounds ready to ride. But the real genius was the fuel economy. The tiny four-stroke engine sipped gasoline, delivering efficiency that exceeded 100 miles per gallon under normal riding conditions. That economy meant the Super Cub cost almost nothing to operate, making it affordable not just to purchase but to run for years on minimal budgets. The maintenance was equally minimal, with oil changes every few thousand miles, and virtually nothing else required beyond occasional chain adjustment and brake service. Honda launched the Super Cub in Japan first, and the success was immediate. People who had never considered motorcycles discovered that the Super Cub was genuinely easy to ride, genuinely economical, and genuinely useful for daily transportation. The sales climbed quickly as word spread that Honda had created something different, something better than the crude motorcycles and expensive scooters that were the only previous options. By the early 1960s, Honda was producing Super Cubs at rates that seemed impossible, with factories running multiple shifts to meet demand that kept growing as the model spread beyond Japan into other Asian markets. The Super Cub became ubiquitous in cities and rural areas, carrying riders to work, hauling goods to market, and providing mobility to people who could never afford cars, but could manage the modest purchase price and minimal operating costs that Super Cubs required. The variations multiplied as Honda adapted the Super Cub for different markets and uses. The C50 featured a slightly larger 50 cubic inch engine. The C65 grew to 65 cubic inches. The C70 reached 70 cubic inches. The C90 pushed to 90 cubic inches. Each version offered a bit more power, while maintaining the fundamental character that made the Super Cub so successful. Easy to ride, economical to operate, reliable beyond what customers expected from such inexpensive machines. The manufacturing expanded globally, with Honda establishing production facilities across Asia to meet demand and reduce costs through local manufacturing. Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and other nations built Super Cubs in factories that employed thousands and supplied their domestic markets while exporting to neighboring countries. The Super Cub became not just a motorcycle, but an economic engine supporting jobs, businesses, and entire supply chains across Asia. By the mid-1960s, Honda was selling hundreds of thousands of Super Cubs annually, and the company set its sights on the American market, where motorcycles still carried the outlaw image that Hollywood and media had created. Marlon Brando and The Wild One and countless biker films had established that motorcycles were for rebels, troublemakers, and people your mother warned you about. Honda wanted to change that perception completely. The American campaign was brilliant. Honda hired an advertising agency to create the famous slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda," accompanied by images of clean-cut families, college students, and respectable citizens riding Honda motorcycles to beaches, parks, and picnics. The ads showed people in clean clothes, smiling faces, and wholesome activities, the complete opposite of the leather-jacketed rebels that motorcycles suggested to most Americans. Honda introduced the Super Cub in America as the Honda 50 and later the Passport, marketing it not as a motorcycle, but as a fun, economical way to run errands, commute short distance, or just enjoy riding without the intimidation that larger motorcycles created. The pricing was aggressive, well under $300, making it impulse purchase territory for families who could afford to buy one for a teenager or spouse wanting cheap transportation for local trips. The American reception was mixed initially. Serious motorcyclists dismissed the Super Cub as a toy, something that wasn't a real motorcycle because it was too small, too slow, too practical to be cool. But Honda wasn't targeting serious motorcyclists. Honda was targeting everyone else, the millions of Americans who had never considered motorcycles because they seemed dangerous, dirty, and designed for people very different from themselves. The sales grew steadily as Americans discovered that Super Cubs were genuinely fun to ride, genuinely economical, and genuinely useful for trips to the store, to friends' houses, or around neighborhoods where cars were overkill and bicycles were too slow. College students bought Super Cubs by the thousands, using them to navigate campuses and surrounding towns. Suburban families bought them for teenagers or second vehicles that cost almost nothing to operate and could be parked anywhere. The insurance costs were minimal, with many policies charging less than $50 annually for liability coverage on Super Cubs that were too slow and too safe to generate the accident statistics that made insuring larger motorcycles expensive or impossible for young riders. The parking convenience became a major selling point, with Super Cubs fitting into spaces that cars couldn't use, alongside buildings and narrow alleys, even inside garages or storage rooms, where concerned owners wanted to protect their investments from weather and theft. The maintenance simplicity appealed to budget-conscious students and families who appreciated that Super Cubs required no specialized tools or professional service for routine maintenance that could be performed in driveways using basic wrenches and screwdrivers, following instructions and owner's manuals written in clear, accessible language. The social aspect surprised many buyers, who discovered that Super Cub ownership created instant camaraderie with other riders. leading to impromptu gatherings, group rides, and friendships based on shared appreciation for motorcycles that didn't take themselves too seriously but provided genuine transportation and genuine fun. The practicality extended to errands, with the Super Cub's cargo-carrying ability exceeding what most buyers expected from such small motorcycles, with riders discovering they could transport groceries, library books, or small packages using bungee cords, and creativity to secure loads to the long rear rack that Honda thoughtfully provided. The weather protection from the leg shields and optional windscreens meant riders could use Super Cubs year-round in many climates, commuting to work or school in light rain or cold weather that would make conventional motorcycles miserable, but left Super Cub riders reasonably comfortable and dry. The resale values remained strong, with used Super Cubs selling quickly at prices that retained surprising percentages of their original cost, because buyers recognized that well-maintained examples had decades of useful life remaining and represented better value than new motorcycles costing substantially more. The customization culture emerged, with American owners personalizing Super Cubs through paint schemes, custom seats, modified exhausts, and accessories that transformed utilitarian transportation into expressions of individual style while maintaining the fundamental reliability and economy that made ownership practical. The gas station visits became weekly rather than daily events, with the Super Cub's tiny fuel tank holding less than 1 gallon. But the exceptional fuel economy, meaning that even frequent riders could travel hundreds of miles between fill-ups that cost pocket change rather than meaningful portions of budgets. The commuting times actually improved for some riders who discovered that Super Cubs could navigate congested urban traffic more effectively than cars, filtering through stopped traffic and accessing routes that automobiles couldn't use, turning frustrating commutes into enjoyable rides that arrived at destinations faster. Despite the Super Cub's modest top speed, the environmental consciousness was ahead of its time, with Super Cub owners in the 1960s and 70s unintentionally reducing their carbon footprints and fuel consumption, decades before environmental concerns became mainstream motivations for transportation choices. The dealership experience was welcoming, with Honda dealers training staff to treat Super Cub buyers with the same respect as customers purchasing larger, more expensive motorcycles, recognizing that today's Super Cub buyer might become tomorrow's Goldwing or CBR customer if the initial experience was positive. The parts availability was excellent, with Honda ensuring that even small-town dealers could quickly obtain replacement parts for Super Cubs, minimizing downtime when service was needed, and maintaining customer satisfaction through reliable supply chains that competitors often couldn't match. The licensing requirements varied by state, with some jurisdictions classifying Super Cubs as mopeds, requiring only basic licenses, while others required motorcycle endorsements. But the ease of operation meant that riders who needed to obtain motorcycle licenses found the Super Cub to be the perfect machine for learning and testing, without the intimidation that larger, more powerful motorcycles created. The family dynamics shifted in households where Super Cubs provided teenagers with independence and mobility, without the concerns that automobiles created regarding insurance costs, fuel consumption, and the potential consequences of accidents involving vehicles capable of highway speeds and carrying multiple passengers who might encourage reckless behavior. The reliability shocked American buyers accustomed to British and American motorcycles that leaked oil, required constant adjustment, and failed regularly in ways that stranded riders or required expensive repairs. Super Cubs just worked. You checked the oil occasionally, changed it a few times per year, and otherwise just rode. The engines lasted tens of thousands of miles without rebuilds. The electrical systems remained reliable. The chains and brakes wore slowly and could be serviced easily with basic tools. The cultural impact was profound, as Honda's campaign successfully changed how Americans viewed motorcycles. The "nicest people" slogan worked because it was backed by a product that actually delivered on the promise. Motorcycles that were nice, that didn't require leather jackets and tough attitudes, that could be ridden by anyone regardless of age, gender, or previous experience with motorized two-wheelers. By the 1970s, the Super Cub had sold millions of units globally and was approaching iconic status in Asia, where it had become the backbone of transportation and commerce. The motorcycle taxis in Bangkok were Super Cubs. The newspaper delivery bikes in Tokyo were Super Cubs. The postal carriers in rural Japan rode Super Cubs. The noodle vendors in Saigon used Super Cubs, fitted with custom racks carrying huge loads that seemed impossible for such small motorcycles to manage. The durability became legendary, with stories of Super Cubs accumulating hundreds of thousands of miles over decades of daily use, many of them still running on original engines that had never been rebuilt, despite abuse that would have destroyed lesser machines. The engineering quality that Honda had built into the original design was paying dividends through longevity that created customer loyalty and brand reputation that money couldn't buy through advertising alone. The modifications were endless, with owners customizing Super Cubs for specific uses. The delivery services fitted enormous rear racks and boxes. The rural riders added knobby tires and raised suspension for rough roads. The urban commuters added windscreens and luggage. The Super Cub's simple, robust design made it easy to modify, maintain, and repair with basic tools and minimal mechanical knowledge. The racing even emerged, with enthusiasts discovering that Super Cub engines could be tuned to produce surprising power, and informal races became popular in some regions where modified Super Cubs competed against each other on closed courses or drag strips. The races were more about fun and creativity than serious competition, but they demonstrated that even the humble Super Cub could be pushed beyond its intended use by people who appreciated the engineering and wanted to see what the little four-strokes could achieve when unleashed. The fuel crises of the 1970s boosted Super Cub sales dramatically as gasoline prices spiked and Americans looked for alternatives to gas-guzzling cars. The Super Cub's ability to deliver over 100 miles per gallon meant it could travel further on a single gallon than most cars could travel on 3 or 4 gallons, creating operating costs so low that the Super Cub essentially paid for itself through fuel savings within months of purchase. The environmental movement also favored Super Cubs when emissions regulations were tightening and two-stroke engines were being banned or restricted in many regions. The Super Cub's four-stroke engine was inherently cleaner than two-strokes, producing minimal smoke and emissions, while meeting standards that would eventually eliminate many competing small motorcycles from markets worldwide. By the 1980s, Super Cub production had surpassed 10 million units, making it already the best-selling motorcycle model in history and approaching the sales numbers of some car models that had been produced for decades. But the Super Cub wasn't slowing down. The Asian markets continued growing as economic development increased incomes and demand for affordable transportation. The Super Cub remained the default choice for millions of buyers who wanted reliable, economical mobility. The variants multiplied, with Honda offering Super Cubs in dozens of configurations tailored for specific markets. The Super Cub 50 remained the base model for countries where anything larger required motorcycle licenses that many riders didn't have or want. The Super Cub 70 and 90 provided more power for riders who needed better highway performance or wanted to carry heavier loads. The Super Cub 100 and 110 offered genuine small motorcycle performance, while retaining the fundamental Super Cub character that had made the model successful. The design evolved gradually, with each generation incorporating modest improvements while maintaining the essential character that customers knew and trusted. The engines grew slightly more powerful through improved carburation and exhaust tuning. The transmissions gained fourth gears on some models, providing better highway cruising. The suspension improved with better damping and spring rates. The brakes upgraded to front discs on some versions, providing better stopping power while remaining simple and reliable. But Honda understood that the Super Cub's appeal was based on familiarity and proven reliability, so changes were conservative rather than revolutionary. Buyers wanted Super Cubs that looked and functioned like the millions that had come before, not radical redesigns that might introduce problems or alienate customers who valued continuity and predictability over novelty and features they didn't need. The competition tried repeatedly to build Super Cub competitors, with manufacturers across Asia introducing similar small step-through motorcycles, hoping to capture some of Honda's enormous market share. Some succeeded in specific regions, where local manufacturing or distribution advantages allowed them to compete on price or availability, but none achieved the global dominance that the Super Cub maintained through Honda's superior engineering, manufacturing efficiency, and brand reputation built over decades of delivering exactly what customers wanted. By the 1990s, environmental regulations were tightening globally, and the Super Cub faced new challenges, from emission standards requiring catalytic converters, fuel injection, and engineering that increased costs and complexity. But Honda invested in meeting the standards updating the Super Cub with cleaner engines while maintaining the affordability and reliability that customers demanded. The fuel injection improved cold starting and altitude performance while reducing emissions. The catalytic converters cleaned exhaust without compromising the fuel economy that remained the Super Cub's compelling advantage. The electric starter became standard on many models, eliminating the Kickstarter that had been traditional, but required physical effort and technique that some riders found difficult. The electric starting made the Super Cub even more accessible, reducing the barrier to entry for elderly riders, those with physical limitations, or anyone who preferred the convenience of push-button, starting over the ritual of kickstarting that earlier generations had accepted as normal. The safety features improved with better lighting, more visible turn signals, and braking systems that provided shorter stopping distances and better control during panic stops. The improvements were incremental rather than dramatic, but they accumulated over years into Super Cubs that were measurably safer than earlier versions, while retaining the fundamental simplicity that had always defined the model. By 2017, Honda announced that Super Cub production had surpassed 100 million units, making it not just the best-selling motorcycle in history, but the best-selling motor vehicle of any type ever produced by any manufacturer anywhere. The milestone was stunning: 100 million Super Cubs, representing 100 million individual purchases by customers who chose Honda's vision of practical, reliable, economical transportation over every alternative available. The cultural significance of reaching 100 million was profound, representing not just commercial success, but genuine impact on global transportation and mobility. The Super Cub had provided transportation for billions of trips over 6 decades, carrying people to work, to school, to markets, to hospitals, to everywhere that life required them to go. The Super Cub had supported small businesses, enabled commerce, and created economic opportunities for people who could never afford cars, but could manage the modest investment and operating costs that Super Cubs required. The Super Cub appeared in films, television shows, and documentaries as the iconic representation of Asian urban life and working-class transportation. The image of a Super Cub loaded with goods, carrying a family of 4, or being ridden through dense traffic became shorthand for the energy, hustle, and resourcefulness of Asian cities, where the Super Cub was as common as taxis or buses in Western cities. The collectors discovered Super Cubs, with vintage examples becoming sought after by enthusiasts appreciating the engineering, design, and historical significance of motorcycles that had changed the world more completely than any high-performance sport bike or exotic cruiser ever could. The early C100 models became particularly valuable, with original examples in good condition commanding prices that seemed absurd for motorcycles that had sold for a few $100s when new but represented automotive history that couldn't be replicated or replaced. The museums displayed Super Cubs prominently, with institutions recognizing that the humble little motorcycle deserved recognition alongside the fastest, most powerful, or most beautiful machines ever built, because the Super Cub's impact was measured not in speed or style, but in accessibility and influence that transformed global transportation fundamentally. The modern Super Cubs continue production today with current models like the Super Cub 110 and 125 offering updated styling, fuel injection, LED lighting, and emission systems meeting the strictest global standards, while maintaining the essential character that Soichiro Honda established in 1958. The step-through frame remains. The semi-automatic transmission remains. The emphasis on reliability, economy, and accessibility remains. The Super Cub of 2025 serves the same mission as the Super Cub of 1958, providing affordable, practical, reliable transportation for people who need to get somewhere without drama, without expense, without the complications that more sophisticated motorcycles create. The symbolism of the Super Cub represents Honda's founding philosophy that mobility should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy or the mechanically skilled. Soichiro Honda believed that engineering existed to serve people, to solve real problems, to create tools that improved lives, rather than just generating profits or winning races. The Super Cub embodied that philosophy completely, representing the idea that good engineering was simple engineering, that the best solutions were often the most straightforward, and that success came from understanding what people actually needed, rather than what engineers thought would be impressive or exciting. The Super Cub proved that motorcycles didn't need to be loud to be powerful, didn't need to be fast to be useful, and didn't need to be rebellious to be appealing. The Super Cub demonstrated that the most successful machine in automotive history could be the simplest, the most practical, and the most humble. A motorcycle that never pretended to be anything more than reliable transportation, but became an icon precisely because it delivered on that modest promise more completely than anything else ever built. The legacy extends beyond the 100 million units sold to the influence on every small motorcycle and scooter that followed. The step-through design became standard for practical motorcycles worldwide. The semi-automatic transmission influenced countless scooters and small bikes. The emphasis on fuel economy and reliability became expectations that manufacturers had to meet because the Super Cub had established that small motorcycles could and should last decades while consuming minimal fuel and requiring minimal maintenance. The Super Cub's success also validated Honda's approach to global manufacturing and marketing, proving that a single model could be adapted for markets worldwide while maintaining essential character that customers recognized and valued. The strategy of local manufacturing, regional customization, and consistent quality became Honda's template for expanding beyond motorcycles into cars, power equipment, and every other product category the company entered. The story of the Super Cub is ultimately the story of what happens when engineering serves genuine human needs, rather than chasing performance for its own sake or style for market appeal. Soichiro Honda looked at post-war Japan and saw millions of people who needed transportation they could afford and rely on. He designed the Super Cub to serve that need with engineering that prioritized durability over power, simplicity over sophistication, and practicality over every other consideration. That focus created the best-selling motor vehicle in history, not because it was the fastest, the prettiest, or the most exciting, but because it was exactly what hundreds of millions of people needed. The Super Cub never won prestigious races, never set speed records, and never graced magazine covers as the ultimate expression of motorcycle performance. But it accomplished something far more significant. It put the world on two wheels, proving that motorcycles could belong to everyone: students and grandmothers, delivery drivers and commuters, anyone who needed to get from here to there reliably, economically, and without fuss. That achievement makes the Super Cub not just the best-selling motorcycle in history, but arguably the most important motorcycle ever built. Have you ever ridden a Super Cub? Do you remember when Honda changed how America viewed motorcycles? Share your stories in the comments. We want to hear how the Super Cub or other Hondas influenced your life. And if you enjoyed discovering the truth behind the best-selling vehicle in history, subscribe for more forgotten legends and surprising stories from the mechanical world that shaped how we move.